My talk will be about challenges from police forensic services. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them after the presentation. I'll be more than happy to give answers if I have the answers for you. So the topics to be addressed today is a very brief history of forensic science. You will be very familiar with the history of forensic science if I look at all the participants of today, but I think it's always good to honor the persons and the people that were important for our forensic science where we are now. Second thing that I would like to address is where do we stand now? And of course, this is from a standpoint of the police of the Netherlands. So you might differ of the standpoint where you are now, but I think it's more an overview of where we stand now from police perspective with forensic science and the use of forensic science in police operations. I think that we need better and more forensic science within the police, and I will try to explain and address that. And we need to improvement in quality, but also improvement in innovations and the use of innovations. A lot of innovations going on and lots of exciting things being done by researchers that we can use in police operations. I also am a strong believer that we need to speed up the forensic processes within the police. And I will try to explain to you why I think this is important and why we in the Netherlands have a whole program running on that. And in the end, I will finish with an explanation about why I think that we need more and better data quality if we want to get all these goals that are there. So a very brief glimpse at history, and in this I lifted out the fingerprint part. So we see that there is a long history of the use of fingerprints, even before people were aware maybe of the real evidence that's used in fingerprints at this moment. But we see that in history there are a few moments to be marked, and in the 1850s, you could say there was a reinvention of the fingerprint. It was already used before that. We don't know for sure, of course, if they knew the value of the fingerprint and how they exactly used it. But we see in the 1850s the reinvention of the fingerprints, and indeed, Sir William Herschel, at that time in India, is considered by some as the father of fingerprints and started putting fingerprints on the contracts in India. Another important thing to mention is, of course, the Carlton-Henry classification method that gave us as a police the possibility to work in a scientific way with a classification method to recognize people when in that time databases were more collections of cards, but the databases became bigger. And also, and that's of course where we're talking about today, the forensic use for crime scene use to identify latent marks, fingerprint marks that were found on the crime scene, and the knowledge that was there at that moment to use it to identify the suspect at that time. And of course, not to be not mentioned is the famous Edmond Locard, who stated that every contact leaves a trace, and I think that's for my presentation the most important topic of today. In the Netherlands, we started in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and this is an example from a file from our archives, where you see that the quality of the pictures was extremely good for that time and still is well preserved. And this was more based on the Bertillonage system, where you took measurements of the whole body. And we only took in that time 4 fingerprints, because I think at that moment the value of the fingerprints was not yet at that level where we understand it right now. Later on we switched to fingerprints, and the photograph is still important, of course. The description of the suspect was still important, but the Bertillonage system was left, and the body measurements were no longer the prime identifier, but that became the fingerprints. We also see that in the United States. This is an image of the FBI in the early days, where you see a large cabinets with fingerprint files where all the FBI staff was able to identify suspects when they were arrested, and also searching with finger marks or finger latents in these huge cabinets with files with fingerprints. And thanks to these classification methods, we were able to search through these kind of amount of data. If I look at the Police Forensic Science Service at this moment, at least in the Netherlands, where do we stand now? There are very professional crime scene investigation units that do the crime scene management on the crime scene, and crime scene management in our perspective is very important to keep the crime scene as crystal clear as you are able to, and to keep people that don't have a role in the criminal investigation from the crime scene, preventing contamination of the crime scene. Visualization is a very important topic, of course, to get all the information on the crime scene recorded. And this can be done by photographs, but also at this moment we make laser images so that we can reconstruct the crime scene on the computer and show it to the judges, the prosecutors, and the lawyers afterwards, so that they get a good image of the crime scene and where the traces were found on the crime scene, and where all the evidence was found on the crime scene. Of course, fingerprint collection, DNA collection, tool marks, drugs, and weapons and ammunition are collected if they are found on the crime scene. Then in the Netherlands, we have at 14 locations a general forensic laboratory where the processing of all this evidence, evidence found on the crime scene is done. So, and normally the general forensic laboratory work with fingerprints, the visualization of fingerprints, the digitization of fingerprints, getting the images of the fingerprints, the DNA extraction, and of course also sending it off to the Dutch Forensic Institute for investigation in the national DNA database, and the same goes with the fingerprints, but the fingerprints database is within the police. Also investigation with tool marks, determination of drugs and weapons and ammunition. On top of that, we have a specialized forensic lab, or you could say we have two specialized forensic labs, one within the police and one within the National Forensic Institute. Their complex laboratory work is performed, and also the enhancing of the evidence, the fingerprints and latest mark in a physical or digital way to get the best quality possible from the fingerprint evidence to work with. If you ask me why we need better and more forensic science within the police, our goal is to get a more evidence-based policing, and we think that is very much needed. What we see in the operational environment is that we have less confessions of suspects that we arrest. That if they have a good lawyer, they will say, well, wait with giving a confession, let's see what kind of evidence there is, and then we'll talk. We have less and less local crime, but more national and international crime. So where you were in the position that the local police officer might know a suspect for that type of crime, or got information about the suspect from the neighborhood, we see that this is more and more national crime and international crime. And of course, very important, and also not to be forgotten, that more technology is available, and more databases with data comes available. In the Netherlands, for instance, we have access to 21 databases with DNA and fingerprints in the European countries, and that is a treaty within the European Union and we can access directly online the fingerprint database of 21 other countries in Europe. And we also have a treaty with the US that we are able to access the fingerprint database of the US to do searches. So you see that more and more data becomes available and more technology is available. But also there's a paradigm shift, and that took place a few years ago, that policing is about finding out the truth, and that based on forensic evidence. So it's no longer the aim to find a suspect, but also to look at other scenarios, other suspects, to see if you can rule out other scenarios than the suspect that you have your investigation or if other suspects are involved, and if the scenarios about what might have happened are indeed the scenarios that are the ones that have to be presented to the judge and the public prosecutor's office. And there can be multiple scenarios, but you have to be sure that something could have happened, and that then you see that forensic facts are very important. So the quality of our work is key. We can play an important role in the whole process of investigations to find out the truth based on forensic evidence. And that's a paradigm shift within the police, no longer only to find the suspect, but really look at the truth and see, are we on the right track? Don't we have the wrong suspect? And are other scenarios possible looking at the evidence? Well, I said quality is key, and one very important topic in that is bias. Bias can be a problem within the forensic field, and we can see that there's a lot of scientific research being done on that. And this is one of the models that I would like to show you, the 8 sources of bias that may cognitively contaminate sampling, observations, testing strategies, analysis and conclusion, even by experts. So if you look at the pyramid, you see that there's a very important role for human and cognitive factors and the brain. And I will go into that a little bit more later on. But also personal factors are important. Education and training, organizational factors, and I will touch that a little bit. The base rate, contextual information, reference materials, and data. And there's very interesting research being done by Dr. Droor about this, especially in the forensic science domain. He also states that there are 6 fallacies about cognitive bias commonly held by experts. The fallacy that these are ethical issues, and the incorrect belief is then that it only happens to corrupt and unscrupulous individuals, an issue of morals and personal integrity, a question of personal character. And that's not the case. It is something that happens unintentionally. There's also a fallacy that these are the bad apples. So if you look at this incorrect belief, it's a question of competency and happens to experts who do not know how to do their job properly. So even experts that are really following procedures, are competent, know how to do their job properly, can be affected by bias. There's also a belief that the expert is immune for that, that our experts are impartial and not affected because bias does not impact competent experts doing their job with integrity. So I think that every expert aims to do so, but still bias can be a part of your work. The fallacy that technical protection is there, using technology, instrumentation, and automation of artificial intelligence guarantees protection from human biases. Not always the case. I'm pretty much concerned about that fallacy, and also the fallacy that technology does not fail, but this in the context of bias is not enough. So it will help and it can help, and I'm convinced that it helps, but it's not enough. Also, the incorrect belief that it's not me, but always the other experts that are affected by bias. And a strong belief in the forensic science community within the police that they are not biased and it's the other experts. So it's always about somebody else, not about me. And at the end, the illusion of control. The illusion that if you are aware of bias and you can control it and counter its effect. I can overcome bias by mere willpower. It's more than that. And I'll try to give some examples for you who are familiar with these kinds of biases in police operations. So 2 examples that I show here. In the police organization, it's very common to have access to all the details of the crime scene and the investigation. If you are part of a forensic team, if you're part of the police, in the briefing that's done when the crime scene was visited, and also when the investigation teams are part of that briefing, there's a lot of information shared. For instance, the statement that they have arrested the father of the murdered child, but he's still denying, and all we need is an identification to solve the case. And of course, that puts a lot of pressure on the expert, for instance, a fingerprint expert or a DNA expert, to come with a positive outcome. And is a negative outcome really a possibility if these are the statements that are being done? But also, and that's very human, you want to score, and here you see some pictures from football, very popular in the Netherlands. You want to score. You want to be the winner. You want to be the one where the coach is very proud and gives you a good position the next time the game is there. But we also see in sports that this pressure can cause mistakes. And in the Netherlands, we have a kind of a trauma with the penalties in football. They train a lot of that, and these are professional football players that, well, maybe have an average rate of 95% scoring with a penalty on the training. But in the Champions League final, it's a whole different thing. The pressure is on you, and the pressure makes you make mistakes. And also not that you want to be the person that lost. And you could have that same feeling in police investigations in the forensic science part, where this pressure is put on you to perform and to make a right decision that will help solve the case, even if the evidence maybe is not there or is too weak to get to that conclusion. But also a thing not to be forgotten is hierarchy and seniority and culture within the police organization. The police organization is an organization based on ranks, on uniforms, on performance there, and on discipline. If that's the case, are you able to withstand that? And also pressure from that kind of hierarchy can be there. If there's a fingerprint examiner that already does this work for 25 years and he asks you to verify his identification, are you able to, and is there an open culture to stand up and say, well, I see a difference in this identification. I do not agree. It cannot be identified because I have my doubts about it. The quality is not high enough. And I see problems within that latent fingerprint or within that DNA sample. And I will not make the identification, or I will not get to the verification with a positive outcome. Is that even possible in your police organization? So these are things that are very important, that there is an open culture and as much as possible, no hierarchy or seniority in the work field. Of course, there has to be hierarchy and seniority in your organization, but not when you're looking at casework. An examiner of 35 years is not always a better examiner than somebody with 10 years experience. And this is still something that is happening in police organizations. The other thing I would like to address to you is another part of bias, and I'll start with this image. And if you look at this image, you probably will see sailing ships, and maybe some people will see a bridge. And if you see both, it's also okay. So you see that the brain can interpret information, and once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. So the brain plays a very important role in what we see, and the brain actually chooses to let you see. The brain is very powerful in interpreting information and leaving out irrelevant information to prevent overload of the brain. So the misconception is that you see with your eyes, and of course these are very important sensors, but the information is processed within your brain. And here I have an example from police operations with the fingerprint evidence. So if you search in an AFIS, in an automated fingerprint identification system, you will get the candidate list, and the AFIS technology will help you to get that candidate list with fingerprints that are pretty similar to the fingerprint that you're looking for. So the latent on the left, found at the crime scene, is searched in the AFIS system, and it comes back with a reference print, so the prints of suspect that we are arrested and are on the database. In our case, these are more than 1.5 million people. And you see a candidate list with numbers, and if you click on the next one, you'll see a next fingerprint and so on. But the point is that you are working with, on the left side, the mark from the crime scene that is of lower quality than the reference print, of course, because this was an unintentionally left finger mark. And on the right side, you have a pretty high quality fingerprint. So what easily could be done is working from the reference print on the right side that is of high quality towards the lower quality fingerprint on the left that of mark that was found at the crime scene. And of course, then you could have, you can have the introduction of seeing things that are not seen before. So if you work from the good quality to the low quality, you will pick a point, an ending ridge, or a bifurcation in the high quality print, and will go and search for that in the low quality print. And because you already have seen the high quality print, you're going to search, is it there? Oh, and you might be convinced that it's there. Whilst if you would have analyzed the finger mark first, not having seen the reference print, you would never have marked up that point because of the visibility of that point, and you're not convinced that it's there. So one of the measurements that we took is that fingerprint examiners that do identifications are not allowed to see the reference print before they have fully analyzed and documented the latent mark on the left side. And then they are given the reference print of high quality, and they have to work from the analysis that they have already done and documented on the finger mark towards the reference print. And they are only very limited allowed to work in the other way around. So you can incorporate this into your procedures and processes. And of course, awareness of bias is very important to look at your processes and to see how you can prevent bias as much as possible, because you never can rule it out completely. So not giving people too much information about the case. I always say the fingerprint won't change if it's a burglary or a murder case. You still will look at the same fingerprints to compare and the same fingerprints to search. And it's very important to be as unbiased as possible and to be as objective as possible to get a good outcome and a clean outcome of your investigation. So, having talked about these issues about quality and about bias, I would like to address some innovations. And we have seen, I've stated before, that it's very important for the police operations to look at these innovations and see what we can use in police operations. So, of course, DNA, a very important tool that we have at this moment and a very important science for the police operations. We see a lot of improvements and techniques to detect DNA on the crime scene. So we are able to process smaller amounts of DNA, smaller samples of DNA, and detect smaller amount of DNA. And also the techniques, of course, after that in the laboratories to get results out of these very small and complex DNA samples. Very important for police operations. We have seen research on geographical heritage based on DNA so that we can predict. So we might not still be able to have this person in our database and get a match on that person, get an identification on that person, but we can now get geographical heritage information based on the DNA sample. Very important to get investigative leads. It won't lead to an identification at that moment, but to get investigative leads. Also very important research being done lately and already used in one operational case is the distinguishing of identical twins using DNA. We had this use case where a criminal twin was involved, or at least one of them was involved in a rape case, and we found good DNA samples, and of course we could, the person was in the database, so we could have we matched him on the database, but in his statement he said it wasn't me, it was my identical twin brother. And before that we could not distinguish the DNA, but now we're able to even distinguish the DNA samples of these identical twin, and the right suspect was convicted by the judge using this new technology. Also, the development of innovations based on DNA to determine the eye color and the hair color. And of course, again, like geographical heritage-based DNA, it will not give you a full identification, but it will give you investigative leads from DNA samples important for operations. If we look at fingerprints, we see improvement of techniques to detect and secure fingerprints on the crime scene. On the right side, you see an example of a commercial product from Foster & Freeman, the Crime Light Auto, where you can have forensic light on the crime scene and photograph latents there, so to detect and photograph latents there. And of course, if you work with a camera like that, then you can assess the quality on the crime scene in that way. Very important technique, I think. We see techniques to make latent fingerprints better visible. There's an immunolabeling project with the Erasmus Medical University Hospital in the Netherlands. We see a lot of research being done to age determine the fingerprint. So when was the fingerprint put there? And I think that is very important because a lot of the suspects, of course, if we tell them that we have fingerprint evidence on the crime scene, that they were on the crime scene before the murder, and their fingerprints were already there when the crime was committed. And also the chemical profiling of fingerprints to get information out of the fingerprints based on chemical profiling, like was this person using drugs or other things. So important research that is already there or will be there within a few years, and that we can use in police operations and to get this more and more there. A very important one that is from the last years is, of course, the automated facial recognition technology. A very powerful tool to search through large databases with facial images or to compare two images with an automated, with a software algorithm. We have seen spectacular improvements since artificial intelligence is used to develop that tool. And we see high accuracy for standard comparisons if we look at good quality images. If we look at the National Institutes of Standards and Technology in the US, we see that this technology really exploded in sense of the accuracy that's now there. And we see that in use with the automated border control already, where it's a one-to-one comparison, where at the gate and your passport picture is taken from the chip on your passport, and a live picture is taken from you to compare against that to see if you are the rightful owner of that passport. And of course, this is good technology that helps the border patrol and the border guards in making good assessments if there are no imposters trying to cross the border with somebody else's passport. There are some watch outs for this. There are false positives and there are false negatives in this technology. There's a matching threshold where you have to be very careful about where you put this matching threshold to get to scores that are acceptable for the goal that you are doing there, that you're performing there. So very helpful, and I think we'll see an explosion of these systems in all the airports and airfields. This is also possible to use it for police forensic use with images from investigation teams. So it's a pretty much a lower quality image against a reference database. So one-to-many search on your database. You don't know who the suspect on the image is, or that might also be a victim or a witness that you want to have the identity to see from an investigative perspective, what was the role of this person that's on that picture. And we see a high potential of face recognition use cases because of the amount of CCTV cameras that are there. I read an article about London. If you walk through the touristic area in London, your image is collected more than 300 times by CCTV cameras. So there's a lot of footage, there's a lot of possibilities. And also if crimes are committed there, of course, there's a lot of camera footage that we might be able to use with this facial recognition technology. We also see that with ATM machines, but also smartphones that the public have, that the camera quality is immense. We see that in a lot of cases, at least in the Netherlands, people do not interfere if they see, for instance, somebody being beaten up, but they start making videos and photos of the crime committed, and these can be very helpful for us. And of course also social media, a lot of images from the faces on social media, but also think about cases where there's a sexual violation by a social media, or where there is child abuse or child sexual attempts to abuse a child through social media. And there's an image available from somebody under a fake identity. Well, if you can search it like a fingerprint on a database, you might be able to recognize the person and get his identity or the possible identity to the investigation team. But this technology also has some pushback. There are concerns from privacy organizations and politicians. And these are merely based on the fact that the faces are everywhere and difficult to hide. The example of London that I gave. There are some concerns about real-time facial recognition. So on the streets directly when somebody is walking on the street and that there is an alarm because you are compared to a database of the most wanted. And there's concern about that. And the presumed racial and gender bias of the algorithms that were there in the early days and still are there in the bad algorithms, but that's no longer an issue, as we have seen from the NIST test, so from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that performs tests on facial recognition software and accuracy. And in the latest test, they also looked at racial and gender bias of these algorithms. Very important for at least our experience. We have a system in operation since 2015, is that you have knowledge of the algorithm, that you know where the weaknesses are of the algorithm, that you use experts to always look at the results of these systems, because these systems, in my opinion, are only search engines that help you search through large databases and find a candidate list. And still the facial examiner expert has to look at these candidate lists and see if there's a possible recognition. And look at every use case, if it's feasible for that use case, if this can be used for that use case or not. and think about solid standard risk reducing operating procedures that you publish and that are there before you start with this technology. There's a nice paper about that from the WF. I talked about these topics. I talked about more forensics. I talked about quality in forensics, and I talked about the innovations, that there are a lot of innovations there that already there are coming. But the other thing is that we believe that fast forensics will help. You might be familiar with the golden hour. The golden hour is an assumption, and it's based also on research, that if you are there within the first hour, the most cases are solved within the first hour, if there are if there's good information. And the longer it takes, the longer the investigation takes, the less chance of solving the case in the end. So we believe that also forensics should look at that, and acting as quickly as possible during the hour after the crime has been committed will help. And it will help in minimizing the amount of evidence lost by contamination, by other effects. It also will maximize the chance of gathering forensic evidence. Think about environmental conditions, about a very hot environment or a very humid environment. And I can imagine, if I'm looking at India and what I heard, that the temperatures are really, really hot in summer, but also during the monsoons, of course, a lot of rain will minimize your chance of getting good forensic evidence on the crime scene. So fast acting, being there within minutes, hours, and instead of hours, will give you good opportunities. And it will will help you to improve the chance to solve the case, but also to stop and prevent the next crimes. And that's very important, I think, and often forgotten, that if you get the suspect off the street, it will prevent happening. It will prevent and stop next crimes. And think in terms of business values, the cost of crime, not only from a police perspective. It takes a lot of personnel if you don't have forensic evidence to solve the case, but also about the social side, the victim side, and the economics. And there are some nice publications about that you might be able to use if you go to the police chief and ask for this kind of work, because there's a cost on it as well, of course. But I'm convinced that from an economics perspective, it will save you a lot of cost if forensics is involved in the early hours. But not only being there at the crime scene, but also being able to process the data in a quick mind. And excuse me, this is in Dutch, but I think the picture is quite clear. So on the left side, you see the forensic examiner, the crime scene examiner, looking at fingerprints, DNA, chemicals, digital information, and faces on the crime scene. And the faces on the crime scene can be from CCTV cameras, from doorbells, and things like that are there already. And on the other side, there are reference databases, and these are huge, with a lot of people and with a lot of international connections as well. So the chance of getting a match in the databases becomes higher and higher. But you need something in between, what we call in Dutch infrastructure. So how do you get this information as quickly as possible to these systems on the back end that are on the central police side? So we think we're a real strong believer in mobile and getting this digitized at the crime scene and getting the information by mobile connections as soon as possible to the systems, like a fingerprint system, like a DNA database, and a CODIS system, and other systems. So we did some testing with that, and we developed ourselves a crime scene app for the smartphone of the police officer. Every police officer has a smartphone. And on the smartphone, in the police suite application, so this is a closed environment on the Android telephone, that's a vault. So only police officers have the ability to open that and have access to these apps. These are police apps. and the case is already created when the call comes in to the dispatch where it's reported that the crime has been committed. The crime scene officer gets a caseload on his telephone and can read the information that's already noted there by dispatch or the patrol car that was already there before arriving on the crime scene. The CSI can open the case and add fingerprints if they are found on the crime scene, and also photograph these fingerprints. So you collect the not only collect the evidence and make notes of that, but you also make a photo with your smartphone of the evidence that you have found. And it's digitized and can be sent directly to the central AFIS. And at the AFIS side, of course, this is very important that they are ready and waiting for that, so that also asks somebody asks a lot of things from your backside, from the AFIS crew, from the fingerprint examiners that are there. And after receiving those latents that come in within minutes, they can do a near real-time quality assessment of the fingerprint quality and give feedback while the crime scene is still open to the crime scene officer. So if the quality is too low, you can have get in contact with the crime scene officer, and he or she can do a second lift or a second technique. If the quality is high enough, automated encoding and searching on the National Criminal Automated Fingerprint System is performed with the aim to get search results, to get a match and to identify the finger marks within 3 hours. And to see if we have information about the victim, the suspect, or the witness. And of course, this is very important for the investigation team to get as soon as possible information about the victim, if it's a murder case, for instance, about the suspect who left their fingerprint, or maybe a witness that was identified with the fingerprint, so that you can go to the witness and talk about what happened there, while he or she is still having clear memories of it and not being threatened by the suspect at that time. Instead, if you go 8 days later there or 10 days later and there's already a lot happened and the memory is not so clear anymore. We have done measurements. Normally it would take, in a normal case, 8 days to get the fingerprint into the fingerprint system and being processed. And with this, it is 2000% faster, because you make the picture, and once you have made the picture and send it off, it's processed. And we aim to get the result back within maximum 3 hours. In operations that we tested, we did it in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, until an hour, but we never needed 3 hours for that. So it can even be done faster. Also a mobile lab to support crime scene operations. So the National Crime Squad Forensics Unit has a mobile laboratory with rapid fingerprint development on board, with some imaging on board, and the possibilities to send off the image to the national fingerprint system. But also they have on board a rapid DNA extraction machine, where they can make the DNA profile very quickly, within an hour, and send it off to the national database. So also, again, interesting to think about and to speed up the process. And of course, also fast facial recognition. So digital supported request for fast facial recognition. In the Netherlands, we have this in place. So the police officer has rapid possibilities to ask for a facial investigation. Of course, you need then also rapid access to the images and selecting the images of the suspect, witness, or victim in the images, because sometimes you have video and you have to look at the video. Then the police officer is able to send the selected images to the National Criminal Facial Recognition System and with a request for rapid investigation. When we receive those images, again, quality assessments done, selecting the best usable images is done, and entering the image in the National Criminal Face Recognition System for search by an expert. And after the search result is back, this is also verified by face experts that are trained people on the field of facial examination. When there is a possible match, a further investigation is done by 2 other face experts that perform a one-to-one comparison with an outcome that is reported to the criminal investigation team. We also do this in practice, and in a real case, it was processed within 2 hours, and the information was given back to the investigation team. Well, then to my last topic that I want to address, if we want to do this, we need more and better quality data. If we want to expand the use of forensic science within the police with all these measurements, we need more data. So we're looking at technology that gives us the ability to make 9 images of the face in one shot. You see the example on the right side. But we also look at the FBI major case fingerprints gathering from a suspect. So not only the flat fingerprints and rolled fingerprints, but also the palm prints, and also the sides and the writer's palms, and all little parts of the joints of the fingers. We are really looking at bare footprints, if that's a possibility to take, and search more for that on the crime scene. And in the Netherlands, at least, it's not done so often unless we see footprints in blood on the crime scene. But looking for non-visible latent footprints is not performed very much, and I think there's still some work to be done there. And of course, all the other things like tattoo scars and marks and other things. Very important to have more information, more data to match against if you want to expand the forensic science within the police. So to summarize, the challenges for the police forensic investigations team, from my perspectives, are that the coming years forensic evidence will become more and more important for police operations. More and more international or national databases with biometrics will become available, so the chance of getting a match also in civil databases is growing. Forensic evidence and intelligence will improve the quality of police work, and it will be more evidence-based policing. And the quality of forensic work will be more important because of this, and also because when the focus is more on forensic evidence, the lawyers will also want to have, and the judges will also have the guarantee that the forensic work was done in the right way with the right outcome. Innovations are here already and coming if you look at what all the things that are happening. And speeding up forensic operations will make forensic evidence information faster available for the investigation teams, and thus going from support evidence after weeks or months or hours to steering information within hours, to solve the case faster, to do it with less cost, and to prevent the next crimes, and to get, if you solve that case, more capacity for all the other cases, because a lot of times police forces are understaffed and there are a lot of cases to be handled. So it's not only money, but also doing right to the victims and giving them their right. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I don't know if there's time for it now. Otherwise, these are my contact details. You can always ask me questions by email or by phone.
Can I ask? Dr. Ranjit?
Yes,
permitted?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. John, I have this very good all data. You are matching the whatever you are capturing, you are matching with the data only. I have one question. If the person has gone robbery and wearing a mask, how far we will be capable to identify that person? Number two, if there is a mob or a procession going on and somebody attacks on it, sometimes people covers half face on that and they have no data on your record. So what we do in those two cases?
Well, of course, if they're wearing a mask, facial recognition is not in place, and that's why the whole package of forensic science methods is very important. So not only facial recognition, but also fingerprints, DNA, and other measurements, and digital information as well. Also, digital information can be very important, like for instance, which phones were there, and can you read, can you see which phones was in the neighborhood of that crime? So of course there are limitations to every science, but that's why we are looking at, for instance, a 3D scan of the person to see if we are able to, and you might not be able to identify a person on the 3D scan, but you might be able to rule out or rule in people that have the same body measurement. So that's what we're looking for at the future. We're not doing that at this moment, but you're right, there are limitations to that. If you have a mob, and of course, people are wearing face masks, we have also seen that in COVID times, of course, that a lot of people are wearing face masks. What we did was cut out the face mask with Photoshop so that we only kept the upper part of the face, and we still could find people just on the upper part of the face. And we now have seen that the manufacturers of these systems, so the developments of the algorithms, are already incorporating that because of what I've showed on the airport, the automatic border passage. And a lot of people are still wearing face masks, of course, for health reasons. So the vendors of and the manufacturers of these algorithms already incorporated that they still can recognize people wearing face masks. So that for police operations is very important, of course, and very interesting to see.
But I think in the full mask when they are wearing, but eyes are uncovered, no? So I think iris identification in the criminal can help you that way.
Yeah.
What I think in this, no?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think iris is also something that could be there. But of course, iris still has the problem that you have to have a very specific camera and light source to capture the iris. I think if we are able to get the iris out of a high quality facial picture that we take on arrest, and then the possibilities of iris will grow.
Again, there is some limitations. Again, there is there.
Yes, no and doubt. Every technique has its limitation. And that's why it's so important that we use all the techniques and look at all the innovations and make it a mix of techniques and not focus only on one technique.